I don't know when I stopped being a daughter and became a secret. Maybe it was gradual, like the way mold spreads quietly under wallpaper until one day the whole room smells like rut. Or maybe it was sudden, one moment childhood, the next, whatever word exists for the opposite of safety. All I know is that one day, I woke up and realized my memories weren't just painful. They were evidence. The chapter of my life I'm writing from now isn't the past. It's the aftermath. The part where your body survives, but your mind keeps reliving battles you didn't choose. The part where you wake up in a bed that isn't the one you grew up in, years later, and still feel 12 inside your chest, small, shaking, silent. People talk about trauma like it's a moment, a single event, like a gunshot or a car crash or a lightning strike. But sometimes trauma is a season, years long, nameable only afterward when you finally recognize you've been bleeding the whole time. That morning started like any other. Sun through the blinds. Coffee brewing. The world pretending to be normal. I was 26, living alone in a one-bedroom apartment just outside Columbus. A place where no photos hung on the walls because I could never decide what belonged. Where the sink was always full, not because I was lazy, but because I didn't care enough to wash things meant to nourish me. Healing wasn't something I was doing. It was something I was avoiding. I had been doing fine in the way broken things do, functioning, holding shape, pretending the cracks were part of the design. Then I opened an old email folder I didn't remember having. It was called Family. Inside were scanned photos I must have saved years ago before I cut contact. Christmas mornings. Barbecues. My 6th grade graduation. 4th of July fireworks. My mom smiling with her hand on my shoulder. My dad standing behind us with that same expression he always wore in pictures. Proud, controlled, stiff. A man performing fatherhood instead of living it. At first, I felt nothing. Just a numb curiosity. The kind you feel when you watch a stranger bleed in a movie. Then I opened the last photo. It was me at 13. Standing between them. My mother's arm wrapped around my waist. My father's hand resting on my shoulder. But not gently. Possessively. And the worst part wasn't his touch. It was her face. She wasn't smiling at the camera. She was smiling at him. Something inside me cracked so loud it felt like sound. My vision blurred. My stomach twisted. And suddenly I was back there, not through memory, but through sensation. The suffocating air. The silence. The confusion. The way my body never fully felt like mine. I dropped my phone. My legs gave out, and I slid to the kitchen floor, barely breathing. Panic hit fast and violent, like being shoved underwater. My hands shook so hard I couldn't even wipe the tears off my face. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, and for a second, I thought I might faint or throw up or disappear entirely. It's strange how the body remembers what the brain hides. I curled my knees up to my chest and pressed my forehead against them, just like I used to do in my childhood room when the walls listened and the house held secrets. A voice in my head whispered something I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud. She knew. She always knew. That truth, the one my body had carried for years, finally reached my mouth. I said it, soft at first, then louder, then screaming. She knew. She knew. She knew. My voice echoed off the empty apartment walls. No one was there to hush me. No one was there to tell me to stop. For once, there was no door creaking open. No footsteps. No warning. Just me and the truth. I thought about calling someone. But who do you call when the thing that broke you wasn't a stranger, but the people the world told you were supposed to love you the most? Instead, I stayed on that cold tile until my breathing finally slowed and my pulse stopped racing. And when I could swallow air again, I whispered a question I had avoided my whole life. What if the person who betrayed me wasn't just him, but her? The question didn't shatter me. It freed me. Because once truth is spoken, it demands movement. It demands reckoning. It demands healing. And healing, real healing, starts with letting the truth burn everything that protected the lie. That was the day everything broke. But it was also the day everything finally started. Before everything changed, life was simple. Or at least, it felt that way through the eyes of a child who believed love was permanent and parents were always right. Before fear lived in my bones, before silence became my second language, there were ordinary days. Days filled with cereal bowls, Saturday morning cartoons, scraped knees, and the quiet certainty that home was the safest place in the world. We lived in a beige, two-story house in a quiet Ohio neighborhood, the kind where everyone mowed their lawns on Sundays and waved even if they didn't know your name. There were wind chimes on the porch, a faded welcome mat, and a mailbox my dad swore he'd replace but never did. Every spring, my mom planted flowers, petunias, mostly. They were her favorite. She said they made the house look alive. Looking back, I realized she needed the illusion of life. Desperately. Inside, the house smelled like coffee, laundry detergent, and whatever scented candle was on sale that week. The living room had stiff couches no one liked sitting on, and plastic covers were still on some furniture even though we weren't the kind of family with expensive things worth protecting. But I didn't notice those contradictions back then. Because back then, I thought my parents were just like everyone else's. My dad worked long hours as a truck mechanic. He came home smelling like oil and metal, his clothes stained and hands rough. Sometimes he'd lift me onto his shoulders, and I'd giggle, believing that being held high meant being cherished. My mom was softer, warm smiles, floral aprons, the hum of hymns while she cooked. She always seemed tired, but I thought that was just what adults were, worn-out versions of who they used to be. I trusted her more than anyone. She brushed my hair before school. She packed my lunches with little handwritten notes. Be brave today. I love you always. Funny how words can age into weapons. Family dinners felt important back then. The table was always set, even if the food was simple. Spaghetti, meatloaf, chicken casserole. Nothing fancy, but it felt like ritual. And every night, without fail, my dad prayed before we ate. Bless this home. Bless this family. Keep us united. United. That word haunts me now. But as a child, it sounded holy. Birthdays were loud. Christmas was magical. Summer meant road trips to small towns and cheap motels where the sheets smelled like bleach and the swimming pool was always colder than it looked. I remember laughter, real or performed. I can't tell anymore. Back then, I believed love was loud laughter and warm dinners and holding hands during church service. I believed safety was guaranteed. There was one memory from that time that still feels untouched by the darkness that came after. I was 7. My bike had training wheels, and I was terrified to ride without them. My dad stood behind me in the driveway, one hand steady on the back of the seat. "You're ready?" he said. I shook my head so hard my pigtails slapped my cheeks. "No, I'm not." He chuckled, not a sound I'd hear much later in life, and said, "Sometimes you don't feel ready until after you've already done the thing." My mom sat on the steps watching, clapping like it was already a celebration. And then, I rode. Wobbly. Slow. Terrified. But I rode. My dad jogged beside me, one hand hovering but not touching. "You're doing it," my mother yelled. And in that moment, just for a second, I felt invincible. If someone showed me that memory today with no context, I would think, that looks like a good family. Those look like loving parents. That little girl looks safe. But memory is tricky. It's a photograph without the sound, a video without the context, a smile without the story behind it. Because while I remember laughter, I also remember shadows. I remember how my mother's face changed when my father walked into a room, as if she was waiting for him to approve her existence. I remember how the air in the house changed when he wasn't in a good mood, how silence meant safety, and noise meant danger, even if I couldn't explain why. I remember how my mother centered her entire world around keeping him content. Back then, I thought that was love. Now I know it was fear disguised as commitment. Still, there was a window of time, small but real, when I didn't know any of that. A time before the boundaries blurred. Before love twisted into something unrecognizable. Before I learned adults could choose silence over protection. A time when I believed home meant safety. A time when I believed my mother would always choose me. I sometimes wish I could go back. Not to live it, but to kneel beside that child I used to be, brush her hair behind her ear, and whisper, "Enjoy this moment. Hold it tight. Because the world changes soon, and you deserve to know none of it is your fault." There wasn't one moment when everything shifted. No dramatic scene. No slammed door. No lightning strike. It was subtle. A slow and quiet unraveling. The kind of change you only recognize years later, when you finally learn the language of trauma and realize your body understood danger long before your mind did. The first sign was the quiet. I was about 9 when I started noticing it, not the normal kind of quiet, but a charged silence, the kind that made the house feel smaller, like the walls were listening. Conversations became shorter. Laughter became rare. My father's voice became the loudest thing in the house, even when he wasn't speaking. My mother moved differently. Soft steps, careful breaths, eyes always aware. She watched him more than she watched me. And when he walked into a room, the temperature in the air changed, like winter replacing spring. Then there were the looks. His sharp, calculating, lingering just a little too long. His quick, avoidant, apologetic for reasons I didn't yet understand. At first, I thought I had done something wrong. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I wasn't helping enough. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Children are experts in blaming themselves. It's the only way the world makes sense. One night, I remember standing in the hallway, small and barefoot in oversized pajamas, listening to my parents whisper argue in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep, but fear had already started training my ears. My mother's voice was shaky. "Please, just, not tonight." My father's reply was low, tight, controlled. "You want to keep this family, don't you?" Silence. Not the normal kind. The kind that can suffocate. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. Something was wrong. Something bigger than me, bigger than bedtime or chores or childhood mistakes. A few days later, something changed between my mother and me. She still cooked dinner. She still folded my clothes. She still hugged me good night. But the warmth was gone. She looked at me like I reminded her of something painful, or something she wished she could unsee. Sometimes she touched my shoulder and pulled her hand back too quickly, as if I burned her. Once, I tried asking what was wrong. We were sitting at the kitchen table. I was coloring. She was staring into a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. "Mom," I asked gently. She blinked, startled. "What? Did I do something?" Her face softened for half a second, almost enough to convince me she would tell the truth. Then she shook her head. "No, honey, everything's fine." But her voice cracked. That was the first lie I remember clearly. Around that time, he started isolating me. Not outwardly, not in a way anyone outside would question. It looked like attention. It looked like involvement. It looked like care. "Come help me in the garage. Come sit beside me. No need to go to your friend's house. Stay home." But the garage always smelled like metal and something I couldn't name, something that made my stomach twist. When I tried saying I didn't want to, his tone changed. Softness gone. A command hidden inside a smile. "This is family time. Don't make it difficult." And my mother, she wasn't just silent. She was complicit in her stillness. She never said no, never intervened, never protected me. Her eyes would meet mine sometimes, just long enough for me to see the regret there, the helplessness, the cowardice. But regret is not protection. Fear is not love. And silence is not innocence. Over time, I stopped talking as much. I stopped laughing. I stopped asking to play outside or have sleepovers or go to birthday parties. I became a shadow in my own life, careful and quiet. I learned to read footsteps the way some children learn to read books. Heavy steps meant anger. Slow steps meant control. Light steps meant pretending. I learned the difference between a door closing and a door locking. I learned the smell of adrenaline and dread before I even knew the words for them. And I learned that safety wasn't a place, it was a strategy. Be small. Be quiet. Be obedient. Don't draw attention. Don't make him angry. Don't make her choose. That was the rule I didn't realize I was living by. Don't make her choose. Because even at that age, even before I understood what was happening, some aching part of me already knew something devastating. If it ever came down to choosing between protecting me and keeping him, she wouldn't choose me. And once a child learns that truth, something inside them dies long before innocence does. Adolescence hit me like a storm I wasn't prepared for. One day I was a child who rode her bike down the driveway, the wind in her hair, the taste of freedom on her tongue. The next, I was a girl who had disappeared inside herself, walking through life in fragments, barely visible even to those who loved her, or at least those who pretended to. I stopped talking. I stopped laughing. I stopped existing the way other kids did. My friends at school noticed. Some asked if I was okay. I nodded and smiled, but I was only imitating gestures I had observed in movies and books. My interior world was dark, and I was learning quickly that anyone who glimpsed it could be dangerous. At home, the tension had become a constant hum, like a song playing at a volume just below hearing. My father's presence demanded attention. My mother's presence demanded obedience. Between the two, I learned silence could protect me, but only just enough to survive another day. There were moments of hope, tiny, fragile sparks I didn't yet know how to hold on to. My 7th grade teacher, Mrs. Allen, was kind in the way adults often are to children who seem off. She noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way I flinched when someone raised a voice. She asked questions I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to tell her everything, the fear, the shame, the suffocating confusion, but my chest tightened, and my tongue refused. "You're doing great," she said one day, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're strong. Remember that." I nodded, but inside, I wondered if strong meant I was breaking silently. Because I started isolating myself more, retreating into books, drawing, and quiet corners of the school library. The outside world felt safer than my own home, even when it wasn't. I carried the weight of secrets too heavy for a body my size. It was during one of these years, when I was 13, that I first realized the betrayal wasn't only in the act itself, it was in the choice my mother had made. I don't remember what triggered the confrontation. I only remember standing in the kitchen, the fluorescent light humming overhead, trying to make sense of the tension that had been building in me for years. "Mom," I said quietly, "why didn't you ever stop it?" The words were barely a whisper, but in the silence that followed, it was as if I had shouted. She froze, her hand hovering over the stove. She didn't answer immediately. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. I did what I thought was best," she finally said. Her voice cracked. I had to protect the family." The words made no sense. They didn't make sense then, and they don't make sense now. Protect the family? Protect him? Protect her own sense of security while I suffered. I felt my chest tighten, my stomach knot, my throat close. Anger, confusion, and heartbreak collided inside me. I couldn't breathe. By letting him hurt me. I whispered. She didn't answer. She couldn't. There was nothing she could say that could make it right. She didn't hug me, didn't cry, didn't even touch me. She simply stood there, a woman I had once loved and trusted, now a stranger whose choices had defined my childhood. In that moment, the girl I had been, bright, hopeful, trusting, died a little. I buried her deep inside, along with laughter, innocence, and the belief that love was protection. After that, I became expert at hiding. I learned to keep my emotions locked away, even from myself. I developed habits to survive, overachieving at school to be invisible in the right ways, being excessively polite to avoid anger, forcing smiles that felt hollow. And in the spaces where I should have grown, I simply shrank. By the time I reached high school, I was barely there. Teachers called me quiet. Friends called me shy. I called myself safe. But safety, I learned, was an illusion. It was a word my mother and father had used to justify their choices. It was a mask I wore to survive in a home that had never been mine, a childhood stolen piece by piece. I spent nights lying awake, my mind racing, heart hammering, wondering why the people who were supposed to love me had allowed my life to be stolen. I didn't have the language to describe it yet, but I felt the truth in my bones. Betrayal can cut deeper than any blade. I didn't speak about it to anyone. Not then, not for years. I simply survived, learning that the world outside could be cruel, but the home that was meant to protect me could be worse. And slowly, steadily, I began to build walls, not around myself, but around the little girl I had been. The girl who had once ridden her bike with wind in her hair, who had believed in the simple safety of hugs and bedtime prayers. She became a ghost, locked in a room I didn't dare enter, a part of me that only whispered in nightmares. Because when the people who are supposed to protect you fail, you learn fast. Trust is dangerous. Love is dangerous. And silence is the only shield you can ever count on. Adulthood came like a promise I wasn't sure I deserved. Moving out, signing my first lease, setting up a small apartment in the city. It should have felt like freedom. But freedom, I quickly learned, is complicated. It doesn't erase memory. It doesn't erase fear. And it doesn't erase the voice inside that whispers, "You are never safe." I had thought leaving home would mean leaving pain behind. It didn't. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, except for the sounds of my own heartbeat, which often felt louder than the world outside. The first few nights I spent there, I paced the rooms like a predator might, checking doors, windows, closets, any place someone could hide. No one was there, but I couldn't convince my body. My body remembered what my mind refused to name. College was no escape. I buried myself in WAUC, studying late into the night, taking extra shifts at the campus library, volunteering wherever I could. If I could just be busy enough, maybe the memories wouldn't catch me. Maybe I could pretend to be like everyone else, smiling, laughing, passing notes in class. But trauma isn't polite. It doesn't care about schedules or obligations. It waits for you when you think you're safe. I remember my first attempt at a relationship. He was kind, patient, and gentle. And I loved him, not the way I thought love was supposed to feel, but the way you clutch at warmth after years in cold. I couldn't do it. Every touch made me flinch. Every hug brought up 1,000 voices from my past. Sleepovers became nightmares. Intimacy wasn't pleasure. It was panic. And I realized the terrifying truth. The body remembers everything, even when the mind wants to forget. I tried therapy. Sitting in that chair across from a stranger, telling the story, hoping for absolution, hoping for understanding. It felt like screaming underwater. My first therapist made me feel like I was broken beyond repair. I quit after 3 sessions. I told myself I was fine. I told myself I was strong. I told myself that survival was enough. It wasn't. There was a moment, during a particularly brutal winter, that broke me in a way I hadn't anticipated. I was walking home from work in the freezing wind, my coat zipped tight, hands shoved deep in pockets, when I realized I had been crying without noticing it. My eyes were red and raw, and the tears felt like a physical weight dragging me down the street. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to disappear into the cold. I wanted the world to stop asking me to exist in it. And in that instant, I knew the truth. I had been running my whole life. Running from the past, running from my parents, running from the girl I used to be. But running hadn't freed me. It had only taught me how to move quietly, how to hide in plain sight, how to survive without ever living. That night, curled up on the couch in my tiny apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of everything I had endured. Not just the fear, not just the betrayal, not just the silence, but the loss. The loss of childhood, the loss of trust, the loss of the family I thought I had. I screamed into my pillow until my throat was raw. I punched the couch cushions until my hands ached. I whispered her name, the little girl I had buried long ago, the girl who had once ridden her bike fearlessly down the driveway, who had trusted the people who should have protected her. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." And for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected. Rage. Not quiet rage that hid behind obedience, but pure, burning rage. Rage at my parents. Rage at the betrayal. Rage at the world that had allowed it to continue. It was ugly. It was violent. It was necessary. Because after years of being small, after years of surviving, I realized that surviving was not enough. To live, I had to reclaim myself. To exist, I had to face the truth I had spent a lifetime avoiding. And that truth was simple, if brutal. I could never be free until I confronted the people who had defined my cage. I didn't plan it. Not really. I told myself it was coincidence when I drove back to my hometown that summer, the one I had avoided for so long. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The pull of unfinished business, of unanswered questions, of a lifetime of silence, it had drawn me back. The house hadn't changed much. Beige siding, wind chimes, the same mailbox my father had never replaced. The windows were still small and slightly crooked, and the front yard still smelled faintly of petunias, though the flowers had wilted long ago. I parked my car across the street and stared at the door I had once feared, once loved, once wanted to run through and never come back. I thought about knocking, about walking straight in and demanding answers. But when I reached for the doorbell, my hand froze. My heart hammered like it wanted to escape my chest. I remembered something my therapist had said years ago: confrontation isn't always about them. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your voice. And that was exactly what I needed. My voice. My life. My truth. I stepped inside. The familiar smell hit me first: coffee, laundry detergent, faint bleach. Then the tension. The invisible walls I had once felt pressing down, ready to punish any movement, any word. My mother answered the door. She looked older, frailer, the lines in her face deepened. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Recognition. Surprise. Something like guilt. "Hi," I said, my voice steady, though I felt every tremor underneath. "Hi, honey," she said, hesitating. You're back." I stepped inside. The living room looked smaller than I remembered. I realized how much of it existed in memory, how much I had built in my mind. We Saturday. Silence stretched. I didn't start with anger. I started with a question I had carried for over a decade. Why? Her eyes filled, but she didn't answer immediately. I let the word hang. Simple. Direct. Heavy. "Why did you let it happen?" I whispered. The silence that followed was suffocating. My father came into the room then, slower than I remembered, his expression guarded. He must have seen the look in my eyes, the way I carried myself, the quiet force I had built over years of surviving. My mother spoke first. Her voice cracked. I didn't know what to do. I thought keeping the family together was the only way. You made your choice, I interrupted. Every day. For 10 years. And I suffered while you preserved your marriage. My father shifted, hands tightening on his knees. No, I said. Don't. Just don't. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind over and over, but nothing could prepare me for the weight of their reactions, or lack thereof. My mother looked down, ashamed but unrepentant. My father avoided my gaze. Neither offered comfort, apology, or explanation that could undo the past. Only silence, and the faint hum of a house that had never been mine. For a long moment, I sat in the truth I had always feared to face. They had chosen themselves. They had chosen their marriage. They had chosen comfort over me. And I realized, finally, that I didn't need their permission to exist. I didn't need their recognition to reclaim myself. I'm done being invisible, I said. My voice, once trembling and hesitant, rang clear. I'm done surviving on your terms. I am alive, and I am not yours to control. Not anymore. I stood. The air in the room felt different somehow, lighter, though heavy with history. I didn't wait for them to respond. I walked to the door, and with one last look at the people who had betrayed me, I stepped outside. For the first time in my life, I felt the small thrill of liberation. Not because they had changed, not because the past had been erased, but because I had finally chosen myself. As I walked to my car, I felt the weight on my chest lift, just enough to breathe. Just enough to know that reclaiming your life isn't about undoing what happened. It's about standing tall in spite of it, and I was finally ready to stand.